right, so we're going to pick up where we left off last week in 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now, where we picked up last week was when David came down to he came down and spoke with his brothers, and he heard Goliath shout a blasphemy against God and his people, and so he was upset about that. And David made a proclamation of, who is this Philistine that he should say something like this against our God? All right, and so the people heard this. The armies, everybody heard this. And so when we pick up in verse 31, and verse 31 is a continuation of the effects of this conversation that David had out in the field amongst all the gossiping soldiers who may have heard things, the commanders and things like that. So again, remember, David had access to these people. David, in some ways, had their ear. And so now he definitely does. Here's this little kid who makes this proclamation. They were scared and afraid, but he makes this proclamation. And so you know that bound to have gotten the people talking a little bit. And so what we see in verse 31, starting there, we're going to read verses 31 through 37 of 1 Samuel chapter 17. It says, "When the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, 'Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine.' And Saul said to David, 'You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth.' But David said to Saul, 'Your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God.' And David said, 'The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine.' And Saul said to David, 'Go, and the Lord be with you.'" So question number one, after we read this, the stuff that David was saying made his way to Saul, King Saul. And so Saul has David brought before him. And David said, don't worry about this guy. I'll go down there and fight him. I don't care. And Saul says, "You're little. You're not adequate. You can't go fight this guy. You're but just a youth. He's a giant. Not only is he a giant, he's someone who's been fighting wars since he was a youngin'." David said, "I don't care." He said, "I got plenty of experience." He said, I've fought beasts before. This is just another one. He said, "And God delivered me from from that danger. He can deliver me from this too." All right, so David makes a pretty bold prediction here. But question number one is, thinking about what David said and what Saul did, what risk was Saul taking by letting David face Goliath in battle?
Goliath killed David, then they was going to have to serve.
Exactly. Look at verses 8 and 9. Look at verses 8 and 9. This is Goliath talking. "He stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, 'Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. All right, so that was the risk. So Fred's exactly right. That was the risk that Saul was taking by allowing really someone to go and fight his battle. Honestly, Saul should have been the one out there. Because remember, Saul was the physical representative of God and was someone who was supposed to fight. But what was he doing? He wasn't. He was scared and afraid. He was setting another kind of example. And he obviously he didn't have the courage, and obviously he didn't have the trust in God that David did. So there's some big lessons right there. Which leads us to question number 2. David is pretty confident that he can defeat Goliath. Is this faith or merely youthful arrogance talking?
Because they relied on God to give him strength to kill the beast he killed during protecting his flock.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the thing. When Saul challenged David on his adequacy to fight Goliath, David told him of his triumphs out in the wild. Now, it is a very different circumstance, killing a beast in the wild versus going out and fighting this enormous man who has practiced for battle since he was a youth. Very different kind of situation.
He's a combat veteran.
Yeah, pretty much. That's what Goliath was. He was a combat veteran. He had seen it, and he was a champion. But here's the thing, though. Although this is very different, something I saw here. David not only defended his father's flocks, but he went on the offensive by chasing them down and taking them from their mouths. Now, put that in perspective for a minute. The scripture tells us, on David's own account, he said, I protected my father's flocks. And he said, whenever a lion or a bear came down and took one of these flocks, he said, I run him down and I clubbed him and I took back what was ours. So he wasn't just on the defense. David was also on the offense. Now, how many of you are going to go after a lion or a bear with a club? Because remember, he didn't have a 300 Win Mag or a 338 or something like that to take down something like that, or a 45-70. Yeah, yeah. But you think about it, hey, Layman. So you think about that for a minute.
How's everybody?
So you think about David. David didn't have sophisticated weaponry. He didn't have the sophisticated weaponry. But he went after, on the offensive, a lion or a bear that took something that was one of his flocks. So that shows David not only was someone who could protect himself, but he was also somebody who could go out and make some things happen on his own.
That was his job.
It was his job, but you think about that job.
It's still his job.
It's still his job. But you think about it. A lion or a bear. Are you going to go chase one down?
I've ran after bears. Yeah.
With just a staff?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
that's fine.
I've been around tigers before too.
Yeah. Yeah, you had a little more something in your hands when you was near tigers, though, didn't you?
They had an M16.
Yeah, that gives you a little bit more courage.
But still.
But you're out there in the wilderness.
You're talking about a 400 or 500 pound tiger,
Yeah,
when they growl, you got it get your attention.
well, of course. But anyway, you know, these are wild beasts.
But
These-
you gotta do what you gotta do.
yeah, you do, and these are predators.
And, you know, whatever.
But these are predators, and this is a small kid. You know, we learn very on he's small, he's little.
But back then, shepherds done the same, they don't all done the same thing. If a predator come and got their sheep, they tried to get it back. That's their job.
It's their job. But it's a dangerous job, but it shows,
Man,
you know.
whatever, yeah.
You don't think that's dangerous?
I think
No,
it's
go
all
on.
a shadow of Jesus Christ later on,
Yeah.
going after the 91, leaving the 99, going after the one.
Yeah.
Head of life. Way I always do.
But the point I was making is that when in this with David and Goliath, David was not just a defensive person, he was offensive as well. He was offensive as well, so.
Well, I found that out.
And it's the other thing there too is he's very descriptive. He said he said after he done this, he said if they come after him, he said he'd grab them by the beard. All right, so you know if you got a staff, you got something in between you. But he said he'd grab them by the beard and kill them. I don't know about that. I'm not going to face down no bear. I ain't doing it, or a lion. That shows a tremendous amount of courage.
I know when we was kids, we used to go to Smokies and like black bears coming around garbage cans and stuff.
Yeah,
We'd run them away, you know. And when a bear gets around food or something, they get pretty vicious, but we run them away.
yeah,
I mean, you know, it might be stupid, but that's what we done.
yeah. Well, you didn't go grab him by the beard, did you? No, you didn't do that.
It's close to one from the Smokies. That I could have reached out and petted him,
Hmm.
but he didn't bother me and I didn't bother him.
Yeah. But you know, I think something we don't think about is what happens when you come between a predator and its prey. They gonna kill you too if they can. So
You
not,
like snakes?
huh?
You like snakes?
Oh, they don't bother me.
Huh?
They don't bother me.
You pick a snake up and everything?
Oh yeah, yeah, it don't bother me.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I'm not scared of animals. I just respect them. You know, I mean, I'm not stupid. I mean, you know, I want to. I mean, I'm not even going to invoke a buck. I've been out in the woods and grunting at a buck. I didn't have no weapon on me, and he turned around and started coming towards me. Luckily, I was behind a big tree and he didn't see me.
A buck.
Yeah. You know, I think there's a difference in being brave and just being a little bit stupid. There's plenty of videos out there of people being stupid.
You ever been out around any mountain lions? Who's up?
Not in the wild,
Around mountain lions.
not in the wild, but I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, I've seen them. I got one mad at me because I was taking pictures of him. He was not happy.
In a zoo?
Yeah, he was not happy. He was not happy at all. Yeah, you act like it's just old tame kitty cat. Yeah. Anyway, that kind of gives you an idea of the kind of person that David was. He was little, but he had a tremendous amount of faith, and he also had a tremendous amount of confidence in his own abilities. So I think that makes a big difference there. And, you know, another question I have is, in question 3, is how can previous spiritual battles encourage us when we're facing future battles?
Well, they just experience, you know,
It helps, don't it?
Builds your faith, gives you confidence.
Yeah.
Same God that brought you out of that will bring you out of
Yeah, it gives you a little bit more, it builds on your faith. You know, you see what God's done in your life. You know, just like David, see, Saul doubted David. David said, here's my resume, look here, here's my experience. This is why I'm confident I can do this. And see, that was a physical battle that David was going into. There was also a spiritual battle there, but it was a physical battle that he was getting ready to go into. In our lives, sometimes we face physical battles, and you know, such as illnesses or heartaches or things that come upon us in this life. But we also have spiritual battles, and in these spiritual battles, we can be tempted. We can at times we can have a grain of doubt, or things like that come up. But this is where God allows us to strengthen our faith and our trust in Him, even though we may not feel good about a situation. Even though we might kind of feel like, what, well, God, I don't know where you're at right now, but I'm going to trust you, and I'm going to hope that you'll get me through this. And it's in those times we look back on these past spiritual battles, even though it was probably pretty tough, and it weighed on us heavily. We can look back and say, okay, this is why I'm confident that this thing I'm facing right now, this whatever obstacle, the spiritual battle for me, this is why I can face it now with more certainty, is because I know what God did for me before. I have faith that whatever this is, He's going to walk with me through it anyway. And we're going to come out better on the other side. And so even though David described his physical circumstances, that describes our spiritual circumstances here today when we face future battles. Is we got that 2020 vision to look back on.
experience.
Yep. Well, let's keep reading here. A couple more verses in chapter 17. Let's read verses 38 through 40. Then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. All right, so that gives us another picture of David. Saul said, here, put this on to help protect you. Well, we've already gotten a description of Saul. It said he was head and shoulders taller than everybody else. So you think his big armor is going to fit this little kid? No, it's not. And it would be cumbersome. If David had tried to wear that, it would have been cumbersome for him. He would have been at a disadvantage because he'd been worried about his armor. So what did David take with him? David took with him what was familiar, what was comfortable, and what worked. He knew what he could do with that. Now, a lot of people, say, well, how could David do that with a slingshot? I'm going to tell you right now, there's some videos out there. Some of these people that have some of these old slingshots like they think David or shepherds would have had. They got this little pouch and they sling them and throw them. These boys was accurate. I mean, from here to the end of the church, I mean, they knocking down, they breaking bottles. I mean, you think about slinging a rock all the way across that church, 100 feet or more, and breaking bottles with it. I saw one where, because they said there's no way it stuck in his head. I saw one where he slung it, and that thing went right in a board and just stuck. Ding! So, I mean, you can get some good velocity, and you can do some damage with them things. And so we've got that mental image. David took his staff and his slingshot. And it said that he went down to the brook and got 5 stones. Now, question number 4. I know where your answer, I know what your answer is going to be. Why did David take 5 stones?
We'll take a guess at it. Goliath had some brothers. Was that it? I think.
That's what you've been told. That he took it because Goliath had brothers. Well, the scripture never tells us that he had them brothers. Now, there were other giants. So maybe they're playing off of that and saying, okay, well, these are... But see, here's the thing. There are some references to giants. So let's look at these. Because now, Goliath may have had one other giant brother, because we know that there was one from Gath. But this came later. So if we look at the time difference between those two, it's a whole different, little bit different time frame. But the other giants that are mentioned come from different places. They're not Philistines, because the Philistines are descended from another race of people. And so the people these giants that they're mentioning are not from the Philistine race. They're from somewhere else. So this is a different breed, different race of giants, or just taller than average people, where they come from. So it's not necessarily that he was going because he might have to fight Goliath's other brothers. That's not necessarily the case. But that's what a lot of people teach. But let's just turn to scriptures and let's just read for ourselves. Go to 2 Samuel chapter 21. 2 Samuel chapter 21. Because this is where we find it. Chapter 21, we'll start with verse 16. Now, when David killed Goliath, we know how that goes. But when he killed Goliath, that didn't stop the war with the Philistines. They kept fighting with the Philistines. And it says there in verse 16, it says, and Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of the giants, whose spear weighed 300 shekels of bronze, and who was armed with a new sword, thought to kill David. But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and attacked the Philistine and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, "You shall no longer go out with us to battle, lest you quench the lamp of Israel." After this, there was again war with the Philistines at Gob. Then Sibbachai, the Hushathite, struck down Saph, who was one of the descendants of the giants. And there was again war with the Philistines at Gob. And Elhanan, the son of Jair, or Agim, the Bethlehemite, struck down Goliath, the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And there was again war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature, who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. And he also was descended from the giants. And when he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of Shimei, David's brother, struck him down. These 4 were descended from the giants in Gath, and they fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. So that's one reference we have. Now, it doesn't say that they were brothers. It does say that they were descendants from giants. And maybe not necessarily the same family. They could have come from different places. So that's what we know. Now let's read the other reference, because it's very similar. In 1 Chronicles chapter 20. 1 Chronicles chapter 20. First Chronicles chapter 20, starting with verse 4. And after this there arose war with the Philistines at Gezer. Then Sibbecai the Hushathite struck down Sappai, who was the descendants of the giants, and the Philistines were subdued. And there was again war with the Philistines, and Elhanan the son of Jair struck down Lami the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And there was again war at Gath, where there was a man of great stature. And so that goes on and tells us he was descended from giants. And when he taunted Israel, Jonathan the son of Shimei, David's brother, struck him down. These were descended from the giants in Gath, and they fell by his hand of David and by his hand of the servant. So again, it's a very, very similar correspondence there. So again, it doesn't tell us that they were brothers, that there was descendants. They were descendants of giants in that area, or from those people. But it never tells us that they were there at the battle with Goliath. It doesn't tell us any of those things. So we got to be careful, because you got to think for a minute. Think about this. If Goliath was there and there were other giants there, why were the other giants not mentioned during that time? Because you think if they had, what's better than one giant? 5 of them. So if they were all there at the same time, if they were all brothers, don't you think that they would be there? But they weren't. So what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that David didn't think about having to kill all these other brothers or giants or descendants. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we got to be careful in what we say is scriptural when it doesn't say that they were his brothers, and it doesn't even say that they were there. We just got to be careful with that. But David took 5 stones, but I think David was pretty confident in that first one, because he sank it right between his eyes. David was confident in his abilities, and he trusted God first and foremost because he went out to battle against this giant. Let's read 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 41 through 51. And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. He killed him dead. Now, it tells us something else. It says David ran into the battle. He didn't walk, he didn't meander, he didn't skip, he didn't jog. It says he ran. David was ready to get the show on the road and take down this giant. But in any of that conversation, did David ever say anything? He's saying, I'm going to do this by my own hand. I'm going to do this by my own strength. What did he do? Who does he give credit to? God. Who did he say that was going to win this battle? God. He said, because God is fighting this battle. He said, you've come out here, you and your gods, and you have defied the God of Israel. He said, well, my God is going to show you something. He's going to use me to show you that he is God, and not just so that you'll know he's God, but so that everybody back here will know that he's also God. And he's not just a God, he is the God of Israel. David made a strong and a very profound statement to his enemy. And so with that question, or with that reading, in question number 5, what impresses you about the conversation between David and Goliath here?
He told Goliath that Goliath was mocking God.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't like it.
Mm-mm.
He said that. But God will be with me. And he will triumph in the end.
Yep. He pointed to God. He gave God the glory. Everything was about God. It wasn't about David. David was confident that God was going to get him through. David was confident that God was going to guide his aim. He was confident that God was going to guide his words. He was confident because he trusted God to get him through. He had looked at his spiritual battles in the past, his physical battles, and he knew that God was with him. But there's something else there. There was something else that God did. We got to think back just a little bit. What did God send Samuel to do?
Actually, to appoint the next king.
There you go. Don't you remember? Samuel went and anointed David. Because God had told Samuel, said, go and appoint the one that I will show you. And it was David. So David knew that God's anointing was on him.
When I was reading the Bible, looked at, and I forget where it was, but it was about David, and he didn't become king till he was 30 or. But that's that's the same age when a rabbi, Israelite becomes a rabbi, right? I think so.
Maybe. I know there's an age.
Yeah, well,
It's a,
Jesus.
yeah. So I can't remember. I know there's an age, I think there's an age somewhere,
It's
maybe in Leviticus or
30
something.
years old.
It's something
I
like
think
that,
it is.
yeah. But yeah, there was a certain age that was kind of the guidelines for when you would do that.
Before
Yeah.
it flips over.
Yeah. But see, David wasn't a rabbi though. David didn't
I
have,
understand that, but I'm saying he was king.
yeah. But yeah,
But he was,
I think it was around 40.
but whatever Saul did, God put David as the king. It was God's will.
So, there may have been a little bit more to David's confidence because he was anointed king, but he wasn't king yet. So he trusted God. See, there's a lesson there. See, God told him something. God said, you're going to be this. And David trusted God enough, even though David wasn't there yet, David hadn't took that post yet, David believed and trusted in God enough that whatever this was in front of him, it wasn't going to stop him from whatever God had anointed him to do. There's another lesson there.
Because, God's got a plan for everybody.
That might just be my sermon Sunday. Been getting some good ones out here.
Just let God lay it on your heart.
All right, so here, this is more of a this is more of just a kind of a typical question, a general question in question 6.1 that as we read this, we study this, and we start to apply these things. So in this chapter, how does David not only face Goliath, but also our myths about human inadequacy?
Well, he had weakness. Just like every human.
Mm-hmm.
I've always thought that's why God said David was a man after his own heart. Because he didn't live that righteous, but when he messed up, he didn't run from God, he ran to him
Mm-hmm.
in repentance.
Yeah.
And I think, to me, that's what I always got out of it.
Yeah.
Because it couldn't have been how high morals he had.
Yeah.
It's just that he looked like he's more else than the Lord.
Yeah.
More else than the Lord.
I think David, God, it pleased him to hear David sing praises to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care who it is, anybody that praises the Lord, he wants to hear that. And
Well, he's worthy of it, isn't he?
oh yeah, sure. Sure.
So, as we read the events of David and Goliath, and we see the things that transpire and the lessons we've already learned and talked about, what does that teach us about human inadequacies? Because, don't at times don't we think, well, I don't know if I'm up to that. I don't know if I can do that. We've all felt that way at times before, right? I'm sure that God has spoken to us at times, and we say, God, I'm just not sure about that. And see, that's this question here, this chapter, that really gives us some powerful lessons about what we think about our own inadequacies and what God thinks about them.
Is it God speaking to you, telling you cannot do it, or the devil?
Well, I know it ain't God saying you can't do it. If God was the one who told me to do it,
Right. God's always positive.
I know.
He's not gonna tell you, you can't do anything.
Well, if God tells you to, the point I'm making is if God tells you to do something, it's not God putting the negative into you. See, we think because of our own limitations, you know,
We're the flesh.
we're in the flesh, you know, we live that way, and sometimes that gets in our way because we can't see what God does. But if God is asking us to do a task for Him, you know, when we start thinking about, well, you know, when God called me to, you know, start preaching, you know, I've told you my story before. You know, I didn't like standing in front of people. I was scared to talk in front of people. So, you know, I could have, when God wanted me to start talking in front of people, I could have just said to God, well, I can't. I'm not adequate. I don't have good speech. I don't know anything. How can I do this? See, that was my human thinking, you know, thinking about my inadequacies. Because I was not a gifted speaker. I'm still not a gifted speaker. Sometimes I have trouble with the English language. I can't get it out. But see, instead of that, you know, I felt and I knew God was asking me to do something and tell something about what He had done for me. And so I said, I'm going to do that. And He helped me along the way. He taught me along the way, and He pulled me through that. But if I would have let my inadequacies get the best of me, you know, I was not good at speaking. I didn't know much about this right here. All I knew was that God did something good for me, and I wanted to tell people. That was the only thing I had. And God said, that's what I'm going to use. And He said, we'll get better along the way. And so here I am today.
It goes back to my first wife had I forget where it is, but I got it marked in here. And it had some scripture. It says, if you want wisdom, ask for God to give it to you. And He will.
Yeah.
And the more you get in the Word and pray, the better. I couldn't even read, you know, 10 years ago.
Yeah. Well, you know, asking for wisdom is a lot like asking for to be made a millionaire. You can sit on your couch and say, Lord, make me a millionaire. And you keep sitting on that couch, you think you're going to be a millionaire? You got to get out and do something, right? Well, the same thing about wisdom. When you ask God for wisdom, if you're out here doing worldly things and not living His way and not reading this, you think He's going to give you wisdom?
You got to get in the Word.
Yeah. He'll give you wisdom, but you got to go in there and get after it.
This is where the wisdom is.
Right. James, that's what the book of James says. The book of James says all things good come from above. And what is wisdom? Especially godly wisdom. It comes from above. But you can't just sit around and expect God to move mountains for you if you ain't going to do something.
Well, just like they say, if you don't work, you don't eat.
Well, wisdom comes through experience, don't it?
Yeah.
Wisdom will come through experience.
Yeah.